Yes, so questions are fine, of course. If questions are happening, then questions are happening. That's okay. So yes, do feel free. We're quite small, so either raise your hand or just come in with a question. And as I said already, if you prefer not to be on the recording, then just type your question into the chat. Okay, so this is just boundlessness. This is just boundless energy, just appearing in whatever form seems to be appearing. So just boundlessness appearing in the form of words, speaking, boundlessness in appearing in the form of a room, a television set, a window, noises, sounds coming out of the window, sensations in the body, thoughts, whatever seems to appear or whatever seems to be happening is just this boundlessness, which is absolutely timeless, spaceless, edgeless, beginningless, endless. And there's no centers, there's no positions. There's nothing in this or outside of this boundlessness that isn't the boundlessness that it is already. And really, that's all that could be said about that. But what we do seem to talk about also is within this boundlessness is a sense of a sort of a contractedness that seems to arise in the body. And out of this sort of sense of contractedness seems to create the sense of a position or of a location, of a center, of there being something here that is now witnessing, aware, or having an experience of whatever else is appearing. And what seems a sort of a side effect with this sort of appearance of this sort of contraction is that the boundlessness that this is sort of lost. It seems to be lost when there is this sort of arising of this sort of contractedness. This contractedness ultimately seems to take the form of a self or of an I am. And really, the suggestion here is that I am is just dreamt, it's illusory. But because this boundlessness is completely wild and free, this sort of boundless energy is completely wild and free, it seems to be able to take this form of a contraction. It seems to be able to appear as a dream of a someone who is here, who is separate, who is having an experience of everything else, of life. And then when that, as that arises, as the dream of I am arises, it seems to make everything else that's appearing to happen into a reality of some kind. So time is real, space is real, the chair is real, these are real words happening. I am a real person, of course, and this is a real meeting happening right now, and this is a real world, a real life, everything like that. And what we're talking about when the word liberation, apparent liberation, of course, is talked about, really what that points to is an apparent energetic shift from this sort of contracted energy, this contractedness, back out into the boundless energy. But the problem with saying that is it creates the impression when we're talking about it that the boundlessness is lost. It's not, but it seems to be that the dream of I am that arises with this sort of contractedness seems to create this impression that the boundlessness, the freedom, the unconditional freedom that this is seemingly lost, somehow lost. And really the message just, it exposes that dream as being that, or it can expose that dream as just being a dream. And then what can sometimes happen is that sort of contracted sense to be someone or something here can seemingly melt just back into that boundlessness again. So I think that's it. If anyone would like to say anything about that or ask any questions, then please feel free. There's no right or wrong questions, and of course there's not going to be any answers either. So whatever's coming up, that's fine. This is just a conversation. This is just boundless appearing to have a conversation about boundlessness. Of course, boundlessness can also appear as just sitting quietly too. I would also just add to that, this apparent liberation that we're talking about, this sort of this sort of energetic shift from contractedness into boundlessness, has nothing to do with thought or sort of beliefs or anything like that. It has nothing to do with the mind, because I think that's a common misunderstanding when the individual hears this message. It thinks it's something to do with a mental state. There should be more thinking, there should be less thinking, or that the dropping of the I am is something to do with the dropping of an I am thought or an I am belief, or that separation is a belief or a belief system, and that the end of separation is the end of the belief in separation or something like that. Has absolutely, that's a misunderstanding, has absolutely nothing to do with that whatsoever. This apparent liberation, this apparent melting away back into boundlessness is irregardless of whatever thoughts or beliefs are happening at the time. It could happen to someone who believes in the most rigid of dogmas, if you like, about how to get there, how to become free, how to lose oneself, if that's the game, how to become liberated, how to become enlightened, whatever the current game may be. It could happen to someone who is the most rigid, dogmatic, strict practitioner. It could just happen like that and take that all away. Or it could happen to someone who's maybe sitting in a meeting like this and listening to a communication, something like this. It is irregardless of whatever's thought about it, whatever's felt about it, whatever's being apparently experienced, whatever's going on at the time. It's absolutely regardless. It's completely acausal in that sense, which is why you may sometimes hear it described as a shock or a surprise, because it just has absolutely nothing to do with anything like that, has nothing to do with any types of mental constructs or anything like that. So it's not the falling away of a belief in separation, because separation isn't a belief in the first place. The sense to be someone, or the sense of separation, is a dream that appears to arise with this sort of contracted energy. So it's energetic, the sense to be separate, the sense to be someone, they're the same thing. It's all the same energy. It's apparently energetic. And when we talk about this so-called liberation, that's what seemingly falls away or melts away, is this sort of energetic sense, contracted sense that there is something, someone or something here, which is aware, conscious, present to whatever seems to be happening. So the end of the individual has nothing to do with the individual. Because what's also revealed in that, in the seeming end of the individual, is that it was never real, it was never really there. In the end, it's just completely indescribable, because it doesn't have anything to do with those sorts of things like thoughts or beliefs or any of these sort of mental structures that the individual feels like it has to work with, or that the mind feels that it has to work with. In the end, of course, you could say that the mind falls away in that sense, because here it felt like the mind was that sort of sense of there being something here, but in the mental sense, a sort of a center to the psyche in a way to which thoughts are happening, feelings are happening, beliefs are arising for. So yes, really, in the end, really, there's that whole sense that there is anything happening to a sort of a center of any kind, just seems to melt away energetically. Of course, the body still seems to know where it is. It doesn't walk into walls, or doesn't seem to anyway. This body still seems to be able to reverse park a car, find its way to a bus stop, get on a bus, do those sorts of things. All of that apparently happening. All of that apparently happens. It's just not happening to this sort of contracted sense that there is someone or something here which is experiencing or aware or being conscious of what apparently happens. Dimitri.
Hi, Neil. You just said something like that there is an individual has nothing to do with individual.
Has nothing to do with the end of the individual. Yeah.
So in that sense, like all the sense of, I don't know, like self-judgment, like feeling inadequate, and all that stuff, it's all just like a useless kind of load that comes from this sense of being someone, and it has no like relevance whatsoever.
Well, this is a story, but you could almost say when those low feelings or low thoughts sort of arise, it seems like they're happening to a center, and it's almost like they sort of converge on that sort of. This is a story, but it's almost as though the sort of the individual, the apparent individual, has a kind of a gravity. It sort of seems to attract all of these sort of some of the thoughts I think you're talking about. So feeling sad can sort of turn into depression, because that's then part of the personal story. You know, well, I feel sad a lot. You know, maybe I'm depressed. Maybe I have depression, something like that. Or a feeling of anxiety might arise in the body, and then what seems to happen in the dream story is then that's I have anxiety. There seems to be a claiming of that. So I think it's just in the same way as thoughts. Thoughts are just really information. So if there's an apparent experience happening, then thoughts will just kind of react to that apparent experience. So if there is a claim or a report there that feels like there's someone here, then there's going to be thoughts about that. Well, I mean, I think for everyone, it's, well, what is this I am? What do I do? What do I like? How do I feel? What's my purpose? What's my life about? Where am I going? What do I need to be okay? All of these sorts of, the thought seems to, in a way, converge around this sort of energetic sense of there being someone there. So it sort of becomes a personal dialogue in that sense. And what seems to happen, I couldn't say for sure if that's the same in every case, but obviously when there is just no one there anymore, then the thoughts just have nothing to really stick to or converge around in a way. There's just no, you know, things like resentment doesn't seem to happen, because, you know, a thought isn't sort of getting stuck necessarily. There's no stuckness or stickiness to what appears to happen. So really, yes, of course, that sort of self-talk, that sense of there being someone who needs to sort of sit down with themselves and give themselves a good talking to for one reason or another, yes, it just completely melts away. Yeah. Is that what you meant, maybe?
Yeah, and as you were speaking, I kept thinking about this sticky fly catcher that you put on the ceiling, and it feels like this. It's like everything, like, yeah, sticks.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say pretty much whatever can arise, you know, thoughts can arise, moods can arise. There seems to be sort of, you know, high moods, low moods, all of that sort of thing. But it just, there's no one there anymore turning it into a personal story. There's nothing there seeming to take ownership of whatever seems to be arising and sort of claiming it as a part of themselves. That's what that energy seems to do, claims everything that apparently happens or seemingly arises as a part of itself and its life and its journey. And of course, in that way, it also feels responsible for it. That, well, okay, I have lots of bad thoughts or negative thoughts, so I need to do something about that. That's just describing how that experience seems to be. There's no suggestion here whether one should or shouldn't. There is no one to do that, of course. But whether there is a seeming response to negative thinking or something, then whatever, even if that's, well, the body goes for a walk to just sort of clear its head or whatever. Yeah, sure. That just sort of can naturally happen. But I think for the person, there's a real sense with the ownership of the thoughts and the feelings and what seems to be happening. When there is someone there to be claiming ownership of those and turning them into a personal story, then there seems to be a weight with that as well, a heaviness to it, because it sort of gives them that kind of reality in the sense of like, well, this is real because it's happening to me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dimitri. I would say sort of thought seems to slow down. It seems to just everything just seems to very, very much simplify really in the end. It's just very simple and as I'm sure you've heard me say a few times, it's very ordinary, very simple and just very ordinary. And whatever apparently happens is just what apparently happens. And that's not some kind of profound acceptance or ambivalence or pushing thoughts and feelings away, because of course there's no one to do that either. There's no one to be pushing negative thoughts away or pushing negative feelings away. I would say actually in some ways, especially at first, it seems that like emotions and feelings in the body seem to be so much more full on alive when they're not sort of happening to that sort of contractedness. Seems to be more, just everything full on. So there's no one to be pushing things away or bypassing or something like that, or ignoring thoughts and feelings. Whatever appears to happen is just whatever appears to happen, which is completely okay, of course, because it's just what is and isn't. How's the coffee in Bali, Dimitri?
Apparently, they have a coffee that's produced by a little animal who eats the beans and then poops it out, and then they create a specialty coffee out of that.
Oh,
But
like bats. I forget the name of
yeah,
it. It sounds like the fruit in English. Oh, I can't think of the name of it now. And that's what you're drinking. That's really gourmet coffee.
I kind of don't, with all the current what is called monkeypox. I kind of thought it's
Oh,
not the
right.
best idea
Yeah.
to drink someone's poop.
Well, I'm sure they clean it.
Yeah,
Is it guana or guava? Guava's the fruit.
it's
In
it,
English, I think it's guana.
it's luwak. It's this
Okay.
little animal with like big round eyes.
Okay. Oh,
So
lovely.
yeah.
And does the animal mind? I mean, is there people just chasing animals every morning for their coffee?
Well, the sad thing is that they put them in like a little cage, and then it like lives there,
Oh,
and they feed it, and then collect all the beans. So that
yeah,
feels a little sad.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure you can get non-poop coffee.
Yeah,
You know, if you
sure.
felt a bit guilty about it. Yeah. I can't afford it. I mean, that's like 30, 40 quid for a small bag from Amazon here.
Oh wow.
Expensive. Nice. I don't think I've ever had it. I'm told it's very, very good coffee.
They, I'm sure you could get. I'm sure here you could get it for free, like if you sneak during the night and then grab a little bit and dry.
Oh, what, steal some?
Yeah.
Yeah. You just announced on the internet now that.
There was something that you just said.
Yeah.
Well, that many speakers often say that is and isn't, and somehow like no, what is, what's arising is sort of like maybe easy to understand, and that isn't part always so magnetizing for me, and then my head tries to understand it, and I can't, but it still is very like attractive, and I don't understand it.
Well, yeah. Um, it's just sometimes added, really, because I mean, anything that's said about this makes it sound like a something. You know, to say this is boundlessness or this is energy, it sort of can only give the impression, really, of a something as being boundlessness or a something as being energy. Well, there is something that is what is, which must make to the mind, it sort of lives in that duality, must automatically mean, well, there's something that this isn't, i.e. too much thoughts or belief in separation or some nonsense like that. You know, there's a condition, some kind, a something that it is, and then something that it isn't. So in a way, to kind of say it is what is and isn't is really just to sort of give that impression, because it isn't what is. What is isn't what is. It's what is and isn't, because you can't really say that it is a something. It just doesn't have that substance or context to it, and it really is indescribable, which I know is the popular non-duality get out of jail free card, to say, oh well, it's just indescribable, oh well, it's just unknowable. It is, but it's just, it's what appears, what seems to be happening. And the only way to sort of give a more of an impression would be to perhaps sort of reflect on how this or what is seems to be for the dreamt reality, or for the dream, for the individual, and that is this is, I know this is something, because that's its experience of itself. I am something here, which must mean that this is something there. So it just sort of seems to put that into everything else. That sort of contractedness seems to be in everything else as well for the individual. It lives in a kind of a subject-object world. But of course, you can't say that the subject then becomes the object, or the object then becomes a subject. I think when some sort of teachers, non-duality teachers, talk about non-duality, they talk about just sort of looking at the subjective in a sort of self-inquiry way, and the I am doesn't live in a subject-object world. It is the subject, and everything else arises in the subject, the you are everything kind of idea. It's just no subject object, there's no subjective or objective in that sense. Certainly not when the sort of contracted sense to be someone falls away. There's just no things. That's why words like absolute, infinite, timeless, spaciousness, they all seem like good words, closer words, to sort of give the impression as much as possible of how this seems to be, and there is no one.
And as soon as I am here, then this is like really real, and like it's a thing.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Because I am here and I am a thing, then this is there, and it is also a thing, something else. And I think the best that the individual can do with that is to try and learn to become one with the other thing. I am a thing here, learning to trying to realize that I am not separate or apart from it. Really, this thing here and that thing there are the same thing. And that's ultimately what we're not what we're talking about. We're not talking about an I am or a someone or even a subjective becoming one with everything else, or seeing everything else as also being the subjective. It's just the end of that whole blah-de-blah, really. It's just, yeah, who cares? It is just open, spacious, boundlessness. It is absolute harmony. I said this the other day, and someone sort of got back to me and really wanted to drill down on what harmony is. It's just a word, of course, but whatever is appearing is absolutely harmonious. This is just the infinite harmony. However it appears, school shootings, whatever, or cancer, pandemics, all of the unpleasant stuff that arises is just absolute harmony. Is absolute harmony, not because it's in balance with the nice stuff. It's because it doesn't need to be balanced. This, what is and isn't, doesn't need to be in harmony with itself. It's just harmonious. The need for harmony, or to see harmony, or to know what harmony is, or to feel harmony seems to be, as far as we can know it, a unique experience for the human being. And that need seems to arise with this sort of contracted sense of I am. And the funny thing is, even that contracted sense, in the end, even that sort of contracted sense, which gives rise to the dream of I am, is boundlessness. That's absolute harmoniousness also, of course. There's nothing wrong with that at all, nothing right about it or nothing wrong with it. It's not better to be no one, because no one is being no one. That's the dream, that's the illusion that there is a better. It'll be better when I am not here. It'll be better when I am absent, because then I'll be able to see the boundlessness that Neil's talking about. No. The boundlessness is all there is already. Nothing needs to happen. Nothing needs to change about whatever is arising or appearing. There's no one lost who needs to come home. There's no home to find. There's no home to lose in the first place.
I'm not sure if it was you or someone else who said that when the me fell away, it was kind of seen that it wouldn't matter if it would never fall away. It's like that the me was also wholeness, and like I just can't give me a break, man.
Well, that's what's unbelievable, of course, isn't it? For the for the apparent me, is that this is what it longs for already. It's actually not what it wants, because it does want the better experience. Of course, it wants to become a more fulfilled, more realized I or me. But yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was absolutely that. In a way, in the story here, that was almost just the first thing that was just blindingly obvious. I wrote a little something about it the other day, and it just sort of came up, and I like to write. Yeah, it was just blindingly obvious. Yeah, that this was home. This was everything, is what was truly longed for. Everything, and nothing changed about this, but it was just completely just couldn't really tell you how it was. Just different. Just an absolute overwhelming obviousness that this is home. Yeah, totally. So I mean, really, I mean, apparently that can, some people obviously do report that there can be sort of glimpses like that, or there can be, that can seemingly happen. It's quite common for that to happen in a meeting, I think, or in a residential or something. And then they come back, the mind just still manages to sort of come back and turn it into a story of some kind, and then there's doubt, and then all of those sorts of things start to sort of flood back, and they feel like that they've lost that something's lost again, which of course is the symptom of the separate experience, that something's lost. Yeah, and it just, so that could have ended, I don't know, and maybe this could have gone back to this, oh no, I had it and then I lost it, and which is awful. I mean, it's an awful thing to happen to a person when that happens. But it just kept getting worse. Regardless, again, like I was saying in the beginning, regardless of what I thought or felt about it, and I would actually say I hadn't died at this point. I would actually say that there was a point where it wasn't wanted. It was like, no, stop, the ride, whatever, stop. No, I don't. This isn't what I signed up for. But of course, there's no one who has a choice in it. It just fell away. And in the end, really, that sort of questioning mind had nowhere to be with it. It had nowhere to land. It had nothing to sort of, because I would say that sort of contractedness, just that sort of physical embodied sense of a separate something here had just melted away. And the mind was sort of trying to work it out. There was something still left here that was trying to know it, work it out. put it into a context of some kind, and it just gave up and died, and apparently in the end. And yeah, that's just what seemingly happened here. But I do hear from people where there can be a kind of a revealing of the natural reality in quite a profound way, but then something just comes back, you know, when the doubt and everything sort of comes back. And, you know, there's no sort of event or something that happens which kind of relieves the doubt in a way. It's just that the obviousness is just so overwhelming. There's nowhere for there to be any doubt anymore. And then in the end, so, you know, the end really in the story, the end is really when it's recognized and there's just no individual, there's no separate person. There is no one to be lost or separate. There's just home. So even that sort of memory or reflecting back on the seeking, the apparent seeker that was here, of course that was home, just taking the form of a seeker. And what the mind loses or doesn't seem to be able to see, because it can't, is that in a glimpse, it thinks that there is a something falling away, being the glimpse, and then there is the glimpse, and then this something comes back. No, that's the dream. That's the dream. That glimpse is all there is. This is still that glimpse. If you've ever had a glimpse, this is still that glimpse. It's just appearing as the form of not glimpse. That's the dream. No one has a glimpse. The individual never has glimpses. You've never had a glimpse. Glimpse is all there is. It's glimpse appearing to have a me, not the other way around. It's the natural reality appearing to be a sort of artificial, separate reality. That's the illusion. So yes, when that was seen, it wouldn't have mattered, but it just apparently, whatever seemingly comes back to claim that seeing, can't call it an experience, it's not an experience, whatever comes back to claim that seeing seems to push it away again, but only in the dream, of course. What you long for is the loudest thing in the room. It's the loudest thing here. Everything is already absolutely singing with the unconditional freedom that this is. Absolutely, just undeniably, unquestionably. And us sitting and having this conversation and questions and answers, whatever seems to happen in the time that we have together, all of it is that, to use an analogy, it's like water asking water what wetness is like. It's water asking water, how do I be wet? What's it like to be wet? How could water describe to water what wetness is?
Tony sometimes says that like these separate energies kind of like pure arrogance, or like the arrogance of the me. Would you agree to call it arrogance?
It's difficult to know without the context of what that was saying.
I think the
How it's
context was
meant.
that the me constantly implies that it is required for life to be lived. Like when people ask him questions like when me will fall away, how will I like do my work? And he says something
Mm,
like, that's the arrogance of the
mm,
me to think that it
mm,
is required.
yeah, and to think that it can find the way out of itself. Yeah. Well, all the me knows, I would say to that is just all the me knows, apparently knows, is itself to be present. That's it. That's the totality of the dream experience. That's it. It doesn't know anything else. It's never had a thought. It's never had a feeling. It's never made a choice or a decision. It's never experienced going for a walk through the woods or along the river. It's never been punched on the nose. Whatever. I've had all of those, by the way, at one point or other. um, and this definitely prefers walking in the woods or along the river to being punched on the nose. But yeah, it's the totality of its own. The dream of me is the totality of its own reality. So all it knows is itself. So in a way, it's like the kind of the most obvious, the most sort of blatant narcissism in a way. Yeah, sort of. But that's not meant as a negative. That makes it sound like a negative. So yeah, but I would, so yeah, you could say, the arrogance of the individual is that it knows what this is, or that knowing can take a different form for the individual. It can be an individual that knows that it doesn't know what this is. So yes, I can kind of see what's meant by that. The individual, all it knows is itself. All it seems to experience is itself. That's it. So it is the totality of its own experience, which is why all the sort of stuff that suggests you look into your experience to try and find the end to separation is completely deluded, of course. The separate experience can't find the end to the separate experience by exploring the separate experience. It doesn't even make sense sort of logically or conceptually when you put it like that. But that's all it has to work with. So that's what it does. And that's why there will always be 10,000 people going to those sorts of things that get you to explore into your experience, to find out what's true, to look at your true nature and all of that kind of thing. Yeah, that's why that will always be more popular, because that's what the me wants to do. It wants to realize itself as this kind of omnipotent, godlike awareness. Everything is my awareness, that everything appears in my awareness, all that kind of stuff. Yep. Knowing, that's the energy of the individual. That's the essence of I am, is knowing. So it will only, it can only explore into that knowing to find its way out, or to find its way to freedom. But because it is the knower, it's a knowing energy, then all it will find is more knowing by exploring into that knowing energy. Totally. Yeah. And the good news is that's all dreamt. It's completely dreamt. There is no knower, there is no knowing. It's a nice idea for the individual as well, isn't it? Becoming God, becoming like a kind of a godlike awareness, I think. it always sounded quite attractive to me when I was a seeker, but something I can't really describe, something just felt off about that kind of thing here. Person never always sounded very convoluted and confusing, and always seemed to, not always, but with some of the teachers I was listening to who were talking about seeing a non-dual awareness, it usually came back to some kind of godlike state, godlike in a omniscient kind of, knowing, pure knowing.
Hey, Neil.
Hello.
And everybody. Thank you
Hi.
for the shared message. It's always hard with words, but somebody like you, who the apparent me is no longer there, we'll just call that clairvision, maybe for the sake of this question.
Yeah, if you like, yeah.
So people that or non-people that people have clairvision that are sharing this message versus those that maybe have a conceptual clairvision, teaching, becoming, things of that sort. I would imagine, but I'm asking you this: for you, is it easy to see these other people sharing this message? People that maybe have had the experience but are not having clairvision.
Yeah, I understand the question. Yeah, and yes, but I kind of could when I was a seeker as well, and really it came down to this sort of resonance. And it just sometimes, I mean, there were clearly some people who were teaching about something progressive, like a path and, or levels and somewhere to get to, and this is how you get there kind of thing. I mean, that's clearly different to what we're talking about here. That's just obvious. But there were more subtle things. And I think, I still think there are. I think this is still a very rare message. I think the clear communication is still very rare. And yes, I think that there are people who can even have quite a profound clarity about what's being expressed. But to me, it's always something is just energetically not quite right. And usually if you listen to those people for long enough, they'll say something like, the end of separation is the end of the belief in separation, or they'll say something like, there isn't a me, because if you look for the me thought, you can't find it. Or if I explore if I look at where I am or where this me is, I can't find it. So there's then a deduction, or I can deduce from that there isn't really a me, it's just a concept in some way. There's usually, and for me, that's a real kind of putting their foot in it, or it's, or that, it's a suspension of beliefs, or a suspension of a belief in separation, or suspension of a thought of a me or something. And that thoughts, it's usually ends up to do with, like we're talking about earlier, it's something to do with thought or beliefs or something like that. It's
very, very subtle. It's very subtle.
It can be, yes. And I, maybe not everyone picks up on that, but I think the people who resonate with this type of clear communication will just probably sense there's something a bit energetically off about the speaker.
Yeah, because even with like a famous one like Eckhart Tolle, and maybe I just missed it way back when, but I don't recall him saying there's no person there convincing. Maybe he said it in a fleeting thought, but really this one just narrows that in and doesn't leave you anywhere to go. I remember he would use terms like pain body and things.
That's right. That, which the unhappy self and stuff,
which that communication, versus this one, which is just you can't wiggle out of it. It's very pure. I feel the unconditional love behind it, and
Oh yes, for sure. And I think in the majority of cases it's all completely innocent, and it's generally nice people getting together and doing something nice together. That's fine. I don't even object to someone going and earning a shed load of money from talking about awakening or something, whatever, that's fine. But it's interesting because actually there was a conversation about Eckhart Tolle that came up recently, and I didn't know very much about him. And it's a bit like what we were talking about earlier, that I think in most cases, it's that whoever is sort of is speaking of a teaching in that way, there's usually been some sort of awakening type experience. And it may or may not have been completely sort of life altering in a way, and there may have been a profound shift of some kind, which has made things easier in some way or lighter in some way. I think that's probably possible. But I know in his story, because I went and looked into it a little bit, he describes this, that he talks about being really unhappy and then just waking up, doesn't he, in the middle of the night, and it was kind of seemingly all over, and he talked about a dissolving away and of the self, but then he talked about this difference between the unhappy self and then the presumably true self, which he talks about as being awareness or consciousness. But the interesting thing about his story is he had no context to put what had happened to him. Right. He didn't really know anything about it. And this is another indicator to me. It was the beginning, it seemed to be, of his seeking at that point, because he then goes on to say that he went and found Zen masters and gurus and yogis and so on, and spent years in, several years or a couple of decades or something, sitting with these Zen teachers, learning about what had happened to him so that he could put it into a context. And he then sort of, this is best to my understanding, he then sort of obviously framed it up, and what had happened to him as being something that can be gotten to by some kind of process, which, in his thing, of course, is by being in the now, isn't it?
Right.
That freedom can only happen when there is a being in the now, or the absence of thoughts, the absence of belief, or something like that. Yeah, the absence of the pain body, that the pain body or the unhappy self can't exist in the now. And it just sounds to me like he is helping people to get to some kind of state. Sounds like mindfulness very much to me.
Yeah, because it doesn't make any sense, in the sense that clearly someone like you or another non-radical speaker has this clairvision or clear vision. It's clearly on that screen there's no one here. It's just beingness appearing as just that.
Yeah, but I would have to say, of course, that's nothing special here. There's actually no one there either. That's the dream.
Right,
there's no one here, and then there's someone there talking to me too. Well, there's two possibilities really at the end of the day, to be blunt. There's either no one there and they're just teaching about something else, or there was someone who had a profound awakening experience and felt inspired to do something with that and talk to people about that. I think that's probably the more likely. And that happens too, and that's fine, of course.
Yeah, it's amazing how the simple message, just this or everything appearing as this goes into Bibles and water feeding fish, and which really tricks at least it did on this individual. Then you're seeking for something that can't ever be found.
Sure. And of course, it's with what Eckhart Tolle is saying, it's the denial. So the pain body, the apparent pain body, is also absolute harmony, absolute unconditional freedom. It is what is appearing as an apparent pain body, or the story of a pain body too. There's nothing separate.
Right.
There's nothing that's not this.
Yeah.
There's nothing that isn't home. So if I was to say to you, well, you know, you have to get rid of your pain body, then the assumption there would be, well, the pain body isn't it. So as long as I'm in my pain body, I'm not free. But this message goes even further than that, and it actually says you're not there already.
Yeah, yeah. With free will too, the whole thing, you can't. It's worse than not having free will. You're not there.
Of course.
Free will. So
Of
that
course.
kind of like just snips.
Yeah, of course.
Straight to the root of it. And I don't ever recall ET. Could just be my memory, but yeah. But thank you so much for illuminating all that. That was.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. In the end, there's just no possibility for it to be about something. You know, there's no message here. There's no message. There would only be a message if there was something else, somewhere else, that is liberation or that is unconditional freedom. No, of course. When the me dies, so does the message, because of course what's revealed with the end of the me is also that there was never a message either.
And what do you feel about death after this falls away? Like, is there any fear of death, or like, what's your, like, do you mind dying or whatever?
Well, there seems to be an instinctive response in the body to protect itself, to go on living. Yeah, there still seems to be that sort of natural function in that sense. But of course, no, the whole story that there is someone alive who could die, of course, no, just completely, no, it's just completely melts away with the sense that there is someone or something here, of course. I think a lot of the sort of big philosophies and religions and so on, they are all to try and answer this question of mortality, aren't they? They want to try and answer the question. To answer the question of life is an attempt to answer the question of death, isn't it? Or vice versa. And lots of traditions and religions, they talk about death because that's the ultimate. I think death for the individual is the ultimate unknowing. And that's the thing the individual fears the most, is unknowing, because unknowing is its absence. which is another reason why the individual doesn't want what we're talking about here. It doesn't want the end of itself. But I think, yeah, all of those sort of philosophies of trying to answer the big questions really come down to trying to answer the questions of life and death. And really, when there is no one, then there's just no more questions of what is life? What does it mean? Where is it going? What is death? What's going to happen to me when I die? What will happen to everyone else when I die? And even I would say, oh, what's going to happen when my mother dies? You know, how am I going to cope when my mother dies? There is just no individual living in the first place who is going to die. So just the whole question of what's life and what's death just melts away in the end. But there seems to be a natural just avoiding death, if possible. I was reading something a while ago about them. I can't remember what they were called, but they were these sort of single cell organisms in a Petri dish, and they favored apparently certain light and certain temperatures because the scientists noticed that if they moved this dish into unfavorable, like too much heat or too much light over half of it, they would naturally work their way back to the more favorable condition. Isn't that amazing? And they had no central nervous system or brain, no neurons. Clearly, no sentience happening there, but that seemed to naturally happen. And I just think that's the same thing that happens in the body and seemingly with all of life. Yeah. And that's the dilemma for the me, isn't it? That's why there are religions and there is philosophies, because it wants to know what's going to happen when it dies, when it's not here.
I would sometimes have this conversation with one of my roommates at the kitchen, and she would say things, even though she never followed any kind of spiritual anything, but she would sometimes say that she's very much afraid of death because she wouldn't continue after, or like she would want to create something that lives after her, which for me, like, that idea never worked. Like, well, it lives after me, but I'm dead, so how does it?
Yeah. I used to I was for about 8 years I was in a samurai warrior school, martial arts school, where they had they used sort of Zen teachings, and the samurai took on Zen not as a religion, but as a way to try and understand death, as a way to give more meaning to their life, or as a way to help them to understand, because the samurais were just soldiers essentially before all of the mystical stories like Miyamoto Musashi and all of these, the Seven Samurai, Akira Kurosawa, all that stuff started. They felt that some of the concepts of Zen Buddhism would help them to understand life and death and so on. And the way that it was looked at in that sense, to the best of my understanding, by the samurai, is they used to meditate on their death. And by doing that, it would allow them to live more fully in the moment, they felt. But of course, that's still a part of the dream story, of course. Yeah. That there's someone who needs to live more fully in the moment. Yeah. You can sort of see a pattern, can't you, with all of these sorts of ideas, really. They all come down to the same idea of being someone who can be more realized, more aware, someone who can know more about life, know more about death, and therefore have a more meaningful experience. It was a way for them to try and overcome the fear of death in battle, to become better warriors, to become better samurai. What's the death of the individual? Is the obviousness that it was never born. The end of the story is the obviousness that there is no story. It never begins. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Neil.